Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good afternoon to everyone and welcome. Or as they say in German, Guten Tag und willkommen, Professor. I hope my pronunciation passes the test. On behalf of the International Islamic Thought and Civilization Istac-Iium, it gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to this afternoon's 15th Istac Distinguished Scholar Lecture. So we are honored today by the presence of our distinguished speaker, Professor Dr. SERDAR KURNAZ, our moderator for today's session, Assistant Professor Dr. Nurul Ain Norman, members of Istac's academic and administrative community, esteemed guests, students, and everyone joining us both here in person and especially those online via Zoom and Istac TV. Thank you all for being here with us. So the Distinguished Scholar Lecture Series is one of Istac's flagship academic platforms, a space designed to foster civilizational dialogue, showcase scholarly excellence, and connect Islamic intellectual traditions with the pressing challenges of our time. Since its launch in June 2023, the series has welcomed 14 eminent speakers from across the globe, thought leaders, philosophers, historians, scientists, and policymakers, all contributing to Istac's mission of advancing knowledge that uplifts humanity. And today, we continue that tradition with our 15th lecture, adding yet another valuable chapter to this intellectual journey. And this afternoon, we will explore the theme, Islamic Philosophy of Law, a case study on AL-DABUSI'S epistemology and legal theory in TAQWIN AL-ADILLA. While the depth of this subject belongs to our distinguished speaker, we can anticipate a rich discussion on how classical works of legal theory, in this case TAQWIN AL-ADILLA, offer insights into the epistemological foundations of Islamic law and how they might inform contemporary legal and ethical thought. And today's lecture offers us an opportunity to consider how such foundational scholarship can illuminate current legal and ethical challenges, bridging historical wisdom with contemporary discourse. It is hoped that today's session will not only deepen our appreciation of classical scholarship and intellectual heritage, but also inspire fresh perspectives on the place of these traditions in addressing modern realities. So before we begin, let us collectively seek Allah's blessings for this gathering. And I invite everyone to join me in reciting the opening dua. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin. Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma inna nas'aluka ilman nafi'a wa qalban khashi'a wa amalan mutaqabbala wa rizqan wasi'a wa fahman sadida. Allahumma barik lana fi majlisina hadha wa alhimna as-sawaba fil qawli wal amal. Waj'alhu khalisan liwajhikal kareem wa dhukhran lana yawman nalqaka. O Allah, we ask you for beneficial knowledge, a humble heart, accepted deeds, ample provisions, and sound understanding. O Allah, bless our gathering today, inspire us to speak and act with truth, and make it sincerely for your sake and a treasure for us on the day we meet you. Amin, amin, ya Rabbal Alameen. So without further delay, I am pleased to hand over the session to our moderator for today, Assistant Professor Dr. Nurul Ain Norman, to introduce our speaker and guide us through today's discussion. Dr. Nurul Ain, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brother Arshad, for the introduction. So, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome again to IDSL number 15. And before we begin, I would like to convey a message from our Dean, Professor Hazizan Muhammad Noon, who sends his warmest regards to you, Professor Dr. SERDAR KURNAZ, and to all attendees today. And he apologizes for not being able to join today because he has an important meeting, but he extends his heartfelt welcome and wishes us a fruitful and engaging session. So it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker today, Professor Dr. SERDAR KURNAZ from Humboldt-University of Berlin's Institute for Islamic Theology. And Prof. KURNAZ holds the Professorship of Islamic Law in History and Present, with a special focus on the emergence and evolution of Islamic law, legal schools, and legal philosophy, both historically and in our contemporary world. His research investigates how Islamic legal theory can be applied within secular contexts, emphasizing its dynamic and evolving nature, and he has been instrumental in advancing interdisciplinary discourses in legal philosophy. Prof. KURNAZ is also recognized for his innovative approaches in bridging classical Islamic jurisprudence with modern challenges. His work includes exploring topics such as the presumption of continuity, istihsab al-hal, the legal epistemological implications of transhumanist developments, and deeper theoretical foundations of maqasid and maslaha in legal hermeneutics. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Dr. SERDAR KURNAZ.
Thank you very much, dear Dr. Noor, and thank you very much also for having me here. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to speak to you about a subject that is for me something that I dream of since I'm a PhD student, creating a new field of Islamic legal philosophy. Before starting, I always forget what I wanted to do here. I have been to Indonesia first. I want to start differently that I do in Germany or elsewhere around the world. So let me just start again. Hamdan lillah wa salatan wa salaman ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. In all my talks, I wanted to do that. I always forgot it, so I did it finally. So I want to speak to you today about an ongoing project, a developing project that I call as being Islamic philosophy of law. Let me share my presentation with you before I start talking. Share. This way. You can't see the presentation, right? It does not move. Does it move? Yes, it doesn't move. Perfect. So Islamic philosophy of law. To understand Islamic philosophy of law, I chose one case study. It is AL-DABUSI'S Epistemology and Legal Theory in TAQWIN AL-ADILLA, his famous work. So the reason why I have chosen this subject does go way back to my dissertation, to my PhD project that I finished in 2015. It is almost 10 years now, a little bit more than 10 years. It was January that I finished my PhD in 2015. There I worked on methods of interpretation, Istinbat al-Ahkam, a very well-known subject of Islamic legal theory, usul al-fiqh. And I've seen before in my master's thesis, I worked on maqasid al-sharia and maslaha, because it is almost in every discussion you see references to maqasid and maslaha. It took my interest to work on that. And I've seen that maslaha, maqasid, and also istinbat al-ahkam are also only parts of a bigger project, bigger philosophy of law that is somehow not fully established in the Islamic legal tradition, because the Islamic legal tradition works differently than our perception of what law is, or how Islamic legal disciplines can be or should be. So in recent years, if you go back to some research in the last 20 or 30 years, you see that there is a growing number on Islamic law that address subjects that are traditionally at universities related to legal philosophy, such as especially the relationship between law and ethics, which is one of the major issues and discussions that we see in recent scholarship on Islamic legal theory and Islamic law. For instance, a freshly published book of Felicitas Obvis in Brill on the relationship between ethics and analogy. So she also tries to attest that there is an ethical turn in Islamic legal studies today. Or what we also see in recent scholarship is the question of epistemology, whether humans can discern good and evil, the question of tahsin and taqbih, or should we rely only on revelation to grasp what is good and what is bad, and to derive norms from that understanding of whether something is halal or something is haram or wajib, etc. So we have also some concepts on natural law. So maybe you know the book of Enver Iman, where he analyzes the Mu'tazili and Ash'ari thoughts from the perspective of natural law, and the case of hard natural law and soft natural law. So these contributions remain underrepresented in the global discourse on legal philosophy. So if you look, for example, on I just got through Turkish, English, and German books. And you don't see there, if there is a textbook on legal philosophy, you don't see many information about Islamic law. Sometimes it's only one page describing Islamic law from a very distinct perspective, from a very particular understanding what Islamic law is. And if the author is very well informed, the maximum you can see is maqasid. But the Islamic legal tradition has more to offer than that. So my understanding is that we can rethink Islamic legal thought through the lens of legal philosophy. There are different subjects that are common between non-religious legal philosophy and religious legal philosophy, and there are subjects that are unique to the Islamic legal tradition, so that we can first of all enlarge our vision how to write the legal history of Islamic legal theory, and how we can approach new questions, contemporary questions. So this rethinking of legal philosophy takes place also at universities. The universities have a specific structure, a particular understanding of knowledge, and Islamic law, or also the Islamic disciplines, especially in Western Europe, are also structured according to the university understanding there. So this gives us also a challenge. Therefore, I wanted to highlight 4 points in my presentation today. Hopefully it will take not so much time. Just a brief overview on studies that deal with subjects related to legal philosophy so far. Then an example of a legal philosophical approach, how we can read classical works from a legal philosophical perspective. And what does that mean for us to create a new field, a contemporary approach to Islamic legal philosophy? And the last point will be a proposal for positioning of a subject like legal philosophy within university disciplines. So I want to present you a taxonomy where I put Islamic legal philosophy and how it is related to Islamic law, fiqh, to Quranic exegesis, hadith, falsafa, kalam, etc. So let's delve in to first my main assumptions before I present you the the 4 points I presented before. I think there is no meta discourse on justice in Islamic legal theory that has reasons. That's not a deficiency. Rather, justice is achieved in Islamic legal theory through proper interpretation. Therefore, the methods of interpretation in Islamic legal theory takes a huge place. So if you do proper interpretation, that leads automatically to justice. Therefore, we do not have, we have it in Kalam, what justice is, especially in the Mu'tazili literature, also in the Ash'ari literature, of course, but in Mu'tazili literature more, because this is one of their main principles where they base their theology upon. But in Islamic legal theory, we do not have a definition of adl or different types of adl, since we have a different understanding of how justice is, how we can reach justice. Looking at Aristotle or different philosophers from the non-Muslim world, they discuss justice openly. The second assumption is that we need a field of Islamic philosophy of law, not only because to discuss concepts like justice, but to find new models and theories to systematize Islamic law and read its history. So I have a twofold approach. First, contextualizing classical methods within its broader history of legal thought, and highlighting its conceptualization in order to create a new field of Islamic law, to make new to develop new contemporary approaches. So what we are going to do today is rereading the early development of Islamic law in legal philosophical terms, doing it in as a case study in Abu Zayd al-Dabusi's TAQWIN AL-ADILLA. And my sources will be Islamic legal theory, substantive law. I wanted to include the disagreement of scholars, but it could take much time, so maybe we skip that last point. But my main focus point today will be on Islamic legal theory, usul fiqh. So beginning with the overview of previous studies so far, is that we see a lot of work on tahsin and taqbih, written in Arabic, written in English, written in Turkish, written in German. So the tahsin and taqbih question is basically, let's do it very simple. Are human beings able to grasp what is good and what is bad? And do they have the capacity to draw, to derivate norms from their understanding what good is and what bad is? The Mu'tazili position would say, yes, human beings can grasp what is bad, so then we can formulate harams. Or we can say that something is halal. The Sunni position is, no, we are not capable of grasping good and bad, so we have to rely on revelation. So we have a very much text-centered understanding of what Islamic law should be. So if we consider, for example, organ transplantation or different questions regarding bioethics. So most of the Sunni scholars would rely always on Quranic utterances or statements from Hadith, because it goes back to that question. I think that tahsin and taqbih, of course, is an important part of Islamic legal philosophy, but it is not the Islamic legal philosophy. It's only part. And we see here why I mention it, because Islamic legal philosophy should be an interdisciplinary approach. So we have to implement also kalam discussions in Islamic legal theory. We have it in legal theoretical works in usul fiqh. I mean, if you look in Amidi's work or different scholars' work, you see that. But we could do it from a very different perspective, also discussing the nature of good and bad from a philosophical perspective, what is missing so far in Islamic legal theory. A huge portion of recent studies goes back to epistemology. Many scholars focus on the question of how human beings gain knowledge. So we have presumption, we have definitive knowledge, and we have ghalabatul dhann, which means one has a presumptive knowledge, but it's like corroboration, so you have more indications that your knowledge is true. So the probative value rises. One of the key questions in history was, if we have a utterance in the Quran, if we know it comes when it is in the Quran, we know that the Quranic words comes from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, definitely. So the thubut is qat'i. But if we know that some utterance comes from the Prophet, we do not know for sure what this sentence means. So that is dalala, the implication. So nowadays, it is also highly disputed whether we have to stick to the pre-modern madhahib. For example, Al-Qaradawi says, when a hukm is qat'i definitive, we have to stick to that. But when a hukm is dhanni, then we can make a choice among the different schools of law. And we can also try to find our own solution for the very question. So epistemology nowadays plays a huge role, and it played a huge role in legal history. And I think that is one of the most decisive characters of a legal philosophy in Islamic legal philosophy. Because if you look at least for the German tradition of legal philosophy, you see that there is not a huge tradition of epistemology. So legal philosophy, contemporary legal philosophy, can learn many different concepts from Islamic legal theory with regard to the epistemological questions, and also in kalam. As you know, everything regarding epistemology discussed in Islamic legal theory, you find it also in kalam works. Natural law versus divine command theory. Relate to the last two questions, we see also there are many studies related to the understanding that there is a concept of natural law in Islamic legal theory, mostly related to the Mu'tazili tradition, and I think that's unfair. because I think that the Ash'ari and the Maturidi tradition is more related to the divine command theory, but they have also a natural law understanding somehow. So if you see the distinction between Mu'tazilis and the Ahl Sunnah, speaking of Ash'aris and Maturidis, you see that there are many scholars working on the contradiction between Mu'tazilis, following a natural law understanding, going back also comparing it with Thomas Aquinas from the Christian tradition and the divine command theory, where sometimes also scholars imply that the Ash'ari and the Maturidi tradition would be not rational like the Mu'tazili tradition, but that's wrong. As Omar Farahat has shown, the divine command theory is as rational as the natural law theory. And in terms of that, I would say that in Islamic legal theory, we have also to discuss what rationality does mean, and if rationality should be the main point that we have to focus on. So I'm coming to the next studies that are relevant for Islamic legal philosophy. I will make it short, Maqasid al-Sharia, because I think as being here in Malaysia, there has been a lot going on, Maqasid al-Sharia. There has been also many scholars who worked on Maqasid al-Sharia, and you are very well familiar with that. Just a couple of sentences regarding Maqasid al-Sharia. There are many maqasid as abstract concepts like justice, tolerance, solidarity, etc. And also the very well-known Darurat al-Khamsa, the 5 necessary elements that should be protected in order to that the society can exist, like protection of life, progeny, religion, life, religion, progeny, reason, and property. So there are many maqasids nowadays. So you have, for example, the Egyptian scholar Jamal ibn Atiyah, who has 24 maqasid. In contrast to that, you have, for example, the Swiss Egyptian scholar Tariq Ramadan, who has 41 maqasid. So we have different layers of maqasid within the different studies. The main point is that we nowadays see that many scholars start to argue with regard to the maqasid rather than doing textual interpretation. So we have a shift, we have a epistemological turn since the 20th century, as Felicitas Opus has convincingly shown, I think, in her article, New Trends in Islamic Legal Theory. Also Qaradawi, before passing away, he also made huge references to Maqasid al-Sharia. So also to analyze the shift from maslaha to maqasid and how to use maqasid today should be also part of Islamic legal philosophy, because there is a change. There is a huge change, I would say. If we look at Al-Ghazali and Al-Amidi, if they argue for a legal ruling, they do not say, okay, that's maslaha and that is predominant. Rather, maslaha is used only a sub division of qiyas or something else, not the huge abstract idea of what the goal should be and arguing teleologically. So the argumentation teleologically is a very, very new understanding, and that maslaha becomes maqasid al-Sharia. Yes, the term maqasid al-Sharia, we have it in history, but the dominance of maqasid al-Sharia is a new one. So Islamic legal philosophy should also deal with this change in understanding. We have then concepts that are related to fitrah, where this is not often the case. Often we discuss it in natural law theories, because as you know, human beings, according to the Quran, are created according to a fitrah, a human disposition, to gain knowledge, to know what is good and what is bad, to seek for monotheism. Some scholars make use of that, so I integrated it, but there are not many studies on fitrah, but I can imagine that fitrah could be an interesting starting point for Islamic legal philosophy, because if, in contrast to a Christian understanding of what human beings are, the understanding of what a human being is in the Islamic tradition is very different. We have a different understanding of freedom, of human actions, of belief, of the of the relationship between God and man. So therefore, I think that fitra could be also a very good starting point. There are some studies so far, but not so much. And the last point would be, of course, ethics. If you look back and if we make a list of publications, be it books, book chapters, or articles in journals, international journals, ethics is very, very dominant, especially in the Western academia. You see there that people interpret maslaha in terms of utilitarianism or consequentialism. An M is missing there, I'm sorry, it's a typo. Or one tries to also figure out to understand the whole Islamic legal tradition in terms of deontology. Deontology means that you do not regard the consequences of a legal ruling, rather you have to stick to the legal ruling. So it is a rule-based understanding of ethics. Utilitarianism, on the other hand, does not look at the ruling itself, but to the consequences, of course, and tries to maximize the benefit of a legal ruling and tries to, in order to argue that way. I give you an example. This is the famous trolley case. So if a train, if the brakes of the train is broken and the train goes straight ahead to a train station where it cannot drive through, and you have two lines. In the first line, there are 100 people. In the second line, there are only 3. And you have the ability to redirect the train either in this direction or in the left direction. So how would you argue? You could say, okay, 100 is more than 2, so I direct it to the left side. That would be utilitarianist or consequentialist in its very basics. Or you say, no, I cannot do that from a deontological perspective, because you say life is worth life. You cannot count 100 lives against 2 lives. So you say then, okay, I do not do anything, it's qadar. So you see there, your approach, your philosophical understanding of ethics and of responsibility has also an effect of the rulings that you derive. So ethics takes a prominent place within contemporary studies. The reason is also one other factor, that especially in societies like in Germany, where Islamic law is not part of the legal system, the place where you can apply Islamic law is only ethics. So for example, if people want to engage in trade, you can say in Germany then that you cannot sell pork because it's forbidden according to Islamic law. So you can make it part of the contract. But it is from a non-religious perspective, it's an ethical or ethical stance. So ethics is one of the major fields where you can implement religious argumentation and to make also your own point. So therefore, we see increasingly works on ethics. On the other hand, the discussion of ethics, if you look in legal philosophical works that draw also the history on legal philosophy, you see that ethics plays a huge role there as well, because you have to make the division or the interrelationship between ethics and law. You have to define it, and also for Islamic law. So you have also, regarding Islamic law, different understanding of Islamic legal history, how the relation between law and ethic was. Some scholars say that there was a distinction. Others say that ethics and law in the Islamic legal tradition went always hand in hand. I don't think that this is true. I think that is a mixture of both. You have to look very carefully in different legal discussions where you can say, okay, there is a huge interrelation between law and ethics. Some and other places you see that there is no interrelation between law and ethics. So these are so far studies that we have that could be part of Islamic legal philosophy. And moving from that, I want to present you one case study on AL-DABUSI'S TAQWIN and AL-ADILLA as a case study how we can approach legal history. That is the reason why I have chosen that, is it is easier for me to make a historical research rather than to develop a contemporary on systematic. I think that will need 20 more years. So therefore, hopefully 20 years maybe I need more time, but case studies are much more easier to demonstrate what I understand, what Islamic legal philosophy can be, or what one type of Islamic legal philosophy can be. When I say Islamic legal philosophy, please consider that I mean it in a plural sense. I think there should be philosophies of Islamic law rather than one philosophy. So Abu Zayd al-Dabusi, maybe Abu Zayd is all of you very familiar, but I give a short biography of his. As a prominent Hanafi scholar who lived in Central Asia. His works are not all of his works are extant. The most famous is TAQWIN al-ADILLA, his work on Islamic legal theory, one of the oldest ones, and the Hanafi legal theoretical book that influenced the whole Hanafi legal tradition. So every distinction that you find in the Hanafi legal tradition afterwards goes back more or less to Al-Dabusi and his two disciples, Al-Pazdawi and As-Sarakhsi. He died in 430. We do not know much about his life, although he was very influential. We do not know much of his life. We know that he lived during a time in Central Asia, where some Hanafi scholars tried to distinguish themselves from a Mu'tazili understanding of theology, kalam. Abu Zayd al-Dabusi is heavily influenced by Mu'tazili ideas. However, he tries to distinguish himself from Mu'tazilis. After his death, like 100 years after his death, many Central Asian scholars want to try to distinguish themselves from the Mu'tazili tradition. However, they do not want to be equated also with the Ash'ari tradition. So what Abu Zayd al-Dabusi does, and some scholars after him, is finding a new way between Ash'arism and Mu'tazilism, which they only label as being Ahl Sunnah. Later on, there will be in the 6th and the 7th century a Maturidi stance, but this will not survive so long until nowadays. Now, today, we have a very Maturidi understanding of legal theory in Turkey, at least. But there is that is more or less a state project, but that's a different chapter. So very important for Abu Zayd al-Dabusi in his TAQWIN al-ADILLA is his epistemology. Interestingly, he does not start with epistemology. What I'm going to present you will be the end of his book, the last 4 or 5 chapters. And then we will see that Abu Zayd al-Dabusi may be influenced by rationalist theories in Central Asia, maybe his own understanding of Sharia. He will give the Sharia a very rationalistically argued ground, so that he tries to solve the tension between revelation and reason. So he gives the revelation a space among reason, but the Sharia has a very rationalistic ground. He attempts to develop a legal system that gives equal weight to rational argumentation and the integration of revelation. So his concern is both theological and epistemological in nature. Therefore, he starts also with describing knowledge using a metaphor of light. He says that once the heart sees the light through reason, and thus if the reason sees the light, the heart can understand what's going on. So for him, reason is like the light of a lamp, which enables the eye to see. However, even if a person engages with the light of reason, does that not yet qualify people to be an alim, to be a knowledgeable person. So one has to deal with the problem that if you know something, there could be the case that you are in doubt. So in order to avoid that doubt, you have to dig in and understand not only the outward meaning of something, the zahir, you have to understand its inner meaning, the batin. In al-Dabusi's terminology, zahir and batin is not the same as we see it in the Sufi tradition. Rather, if you have a deeper understanding of something that you analyze, then you have the inner meaning of something. So you do not have this meaning on the surface. They contrast that with someone who only learns something by heart, that would be zahir, But someone who learns it by heart and understand what he learns, this is the batin for him. So you have a deeper understanding of what we're doing there. So once you have this deeper understanding and you know what to do with that, interestingly, he says, then it becomes ma'rifah, and the ma'rifah becomes ilm, and ilm becomes fiqh. So the highest degree of knowledge for Abu Zayd al-Dabusi is, interestingly, fiqh. And by fiqh, he does mean not only Islamic law, he does mean the deeper understanding of Islamic law. And how to understand Islamic law, you can see it here in al-Dabusi's divisions. So al-Dabusi says there are 6 different layers of law. First, he says there should be definitely permissible things. There should be definitely prohibited things, rationally argued prohibited things. And there should be things that are that could be prohibited, that could be permissible. So we have 2 extremes and 1 line in between. And the 2 extremes he divides in matters related to the world, so worldly matters, and matters related to the afterward, to the akhirah. So we have dunya and deen, by which he means akhirah related things and worldly matters. He starts with the necessarily permissible actions related to worldly matters. And what al-Dabusi here says is quite interesting for us, and I can think that that is also relevant for a contemporary legal philosophy. He says that Sharia should permit, that it is impossible not in the sense that God cannot do it, but he won't do it out of his mercy and out of his relatedness to human beings. He says that there are 4 things that should be necessarily permissible. Sharia cannot or will not prohibit these things. This is life maintenance. So it cannot be that there is something in the Quran that prohibits life maintenance. Defending life from destruction, maintenance of mankind, and care of progeny. So it is impossible for al-Dabusi that there is a ruling that prohibits any kind of sexual intercourse, because then the humankind would vanish, because there should be reproduction, and that's only possible through intercourse. So this is also, I think, a hint for those who, especially in some Sufi traditions, were influenced by Christian traditions, who are totally absent from intercourse and do not marry, etc. So he says that there are necessarily permissible actions related to worldly matters. Secondly, the counterpart, the complementary part of that, are necessarily religious obligations. So if we have, you have to know, if you read al-Dabusi, you have to be cautious, because everything in his book is fourfold. Everything has 4 kinds. I don't know where that comes from, but for al-Dabusi, everything is 4. So he says there should be worship. It is impossible that there is no worship. So, and he says that this is necessary for humankind to know also without revelation that there is a God, the knowledge of the God's divinity. The third thing is that one knows rationally without a revelation that the life of people cannot be purposeless. The purpose of the life of human beings is the state of divine testing, because it is related to the afterwards. And the life should be for the benefit for humankind. It cannot be that Sharia does rule something that is counter for the benefit for humankind, because God does it from his benevolence. So the counterpart of the rational grounds of law are necessarily prohibited worldly actions. So al-Dabusi says also, without any revelation, we know that ignorance is forbidden. Ignorance here, jahl, in al-Dabusi's terms, is to know something how it is not. If you say, for example, this table is purple, then this is jahl. That you don't know something or anything, it's not jahil. Ignorance is to blindly say a wrong thing and follow that one, and being convinced that what you know is correct, although it is incorrect. So ignorance is something doing something wrong and contradicting the truth of something. Oppression is from dhulm, is also something that is rationally forbidden. So there is nothing in Sharia that is oppression. Pointlessness. So if God wants people to do something that's pointless or that is harmful. Harmful here, not in the sense that is related to hudud, to punishments. Punishment is not harmful in that sense because you retaliate something and you recreate something. So if there is harm done, then there is a disbalance, so you have to balance it again. What here at-Dabusi means is harmful rulings without any explanation. So if there would be a legal ruling to say that every human being has to jump out of a huge building. So that would be harmful action for him. So the necessarily prohibited religious actions are belief in idols. So at-Dabusi says it's something that is very common in Central Asian tradition. Before him, al-Maturidi, who died 100 years before, he also said human beings know without any revelation that there should exist only one God. The consequence of that is belief in idols is prohibited. If you do not know any revelation, it doesn't matter. You cannot believe in idols. And if you think that the world was created of purely worldly pleasure, that there is no worship to God, that's also wrong. And that you say that God is not the creator of the world is wrong. And the main important point is you cannot reject prophethood, because if you reject the idea of prophethood, there is no revelation whatsoever. Because as you all know, in the Islamic legal tradition, revelation does only work, or the idea of revelation contains the idea of prophethood. If there is no prophet, there is no revelation. If there is no Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have no Quran. So therefore, you cannot reject the concept of prophethood. Having established these boundaries, what is impossible for Sharia, now we are at the permissible worldly actions. This is very important, because here at-Dabusi says these needs, or these worldly actions, facultative needs, eating, drinking, trading, doing sports, chilling, relaxing, saving of property, being rich, improvement of life. I mean, if you do not need a car, but you want to have a car, that's improvement of life. And sexual pleasure without having the idea of raising children, he says these are worldly permissible actions. That does mean for at-Dabusi, here Sharia can forbid things, prohibit things, and this would not contradict rational ideas. At-Dabusi would here then say, if we do not understand before the revelation that something was forbidden, then the revelation shows us that it is forbidden. So maybe you could have said facultative needs would be drinking alcohol. You could argue for that, but at-Dabusi says no, the revelation shows that originally drinking wine should have been prohibited by reason. You haven't done it so far, and here the revelation forbids it. So here you see that the permissible worldly actions mean that either there could be a prohibition, but it could be also a permissible action. So this is also related to riba. Riba could be perfectly permissible, but since there is an injustice, the revelation prohibits it. The same is true for permissible religious actions. This would be the last case. I haven't put it here because it's very weird how at-Dabusi said it. So we have a totally we have a rational ground of how Sharia works within that frame of rational basis of Islamic law. I want to give you one last example and then I'll come to the conclusion here. There is a famous discussion in legal theory. It is called Fasadul Manhi Anhu in Arabic. That means if I rephrase it, if there is a prohibition. For example, if we look in Surah 62, verse 9, it is prohibited to trade during the Friday prayer. But if someone trades during the Friday prayer, what is the consequence? Do we know that because of the prohibition, there are any legal consequences at all if we do it, or are there legal consequences if we do a prohibited thing? To discuss or to understand how to derive norms regarding this question, Al-Dabusi divides prohibition in two major subcategories. We have essentially evil things, قبيح لعينه, and we have accidentally evil actions, قبيح لغيره. So essentially evil things could be legally defined, that would be shar'an, or it could be coined naturally. They are reasonably wrong and evil. So you see their pointlessness, coined pointlessness. And we have seen before, for Al-Dabusi, one of the four categories of absolutely forbidden rational things is pointlessness. And if Sharia itself says that something is evil, like prayer without ablution or eating pork, this is then legally defined essentially evil thing. If you do this, then the action is void. It's nullified. It has no legal effect. It is legally non-effective. It is al-manhi an ghayri mashru'. This is not the case for accidentally evil things. Qabih li ghayrihi. Qabih li ghayrihi means that the action that you do is not a bad action in its essence, but it becomes a bad or evil action because of circumstantial factors, which could be compiled and attributed. Put it that way, that is too much detail. For example, sales contract during Friday prayer or sales contract with a void condition. So sales contract in their nature are not evil deeds. But if you do sales contracts during Friday prayer because it's prohibited, then it becomes an evil action. So if you have a contract with riba, it is not evil in its essence, but it contains riba, and riba is prohibited. So here, Al-Dabusi says, is if something is not essentially evil, rather accidentally evil, then it has legal efficacy. It is mashru'. That means your riba contract is valid. Your Friday prayer, your contract during the Friday prayer is valid. It is a sin. You make a you are an athim. You did something wrong, but you have to stick to your contract. The maximum would be that you say, okay, we dissolve that contract, but you need your contract partner to say yes, okay, it's fine for me. We dissolve that contract. So you see, if you look at it, the accidentally evil deeds fall in the realm of permissible worldly actions. Therefore, Al-Dabusi says it has legal efficacy. The essentially evil deeds or actions fall in the prohibited realm of Sharia and rational argumentation. So therefore, it is nullified. So you see that there is a huge correlation between his rationalistic understanding of law and how he does it, how he uses it for deriving the legal norms. What does that all mean? This means, in order to understand this from a comprehensive legal perspective, we need a field of Islamic philosophy of law. In order to understand what Al-Dabusi does, we have to look at his work from a philosophical perspective. Unless we would rather skip this interrelation in his legal theoretical work. And why I insist why should Al-Dabusi's point be an Islamic point is because the references he uses and the questions he arises comes from a very Islamic legal perspective. His whole understanding of the tension between revelation and reason is something that is an Islamic perspective. Therefore, we need a Islamic legal philosophy and not only a legal philosophy of Islamic law. So we have own questions, we have own perspectives with which we deal with legal philosophical questions. And I would say that a Islamic legal philosophy needs two goals. One would be context-sensitive study of historical approaches within specific legal schools or individual scholars that we did as a case study at Debussy. Moving from that, engagement with contemporary legal philosophical debates that should be done in the next 10, 20 years. So these are the possible thematic areas that I would propose as one of my last slides, because I'm speaking almost for 1 hour. It is very long. So let's engage with discussions. My suggestion would be, as we have seen in Debussy's case, epistemology and hermeneutics. Going beyond that would be also the question of authority, especially if we look at on the development of Islamic legal schools, the madahib. We see that there is a huge question of who has the authority to decide. In this Shi'i tradition, it's different. As you know, in the 12 Shi'i tradition, there are different hierarchies in order to decide who has the last word. That we don't have that in the Sunni tradition, and authority changes within the course of history. I mean, you have here also academies, or in Indonesia we have Nahdlatul Ulama Muhammadiyah, for example, who claim also. In Singapore, I've learned there is MUIS who claims also authority. So we have different authorities. So we have to also deal with the question of authority, the question of normativity, of course, and as I mentioned before, the question of ethics. Focusing on these 5 points or five subjects would render our legal theoretical approaches being an Islamic legal philosophical approach. So this is my understanding how we can put Islamic legal philosophy in the taxonomy of disciplines. I looked at this from a university perspective that could be made differently. So we have Islamic legal, we have Islamic studies or Islamic theology. This has different subdisciplines, as you know, Islamic law, Quranic exegesis, hadith, theology, philosophy, and ethics. And you see here, where is the mouse? Yeah, there. You see here, Islamic law, I divided in substantive Islamic law, in doctrine and practice. With practice, I mean fatwa. With doctrine, I mean furul fiqh. Let's say Shafi'i doctrine, Hanafi doctrine, etc. And we should have also a discipline on history of Islamic law. Sociology of Islamic law can be the case, but we can skip that one. And here I would say Islamic legal philosophy of law, we need it for the theory of Islamic philosophy of law. We need it for usul al-fiqh, for ikhtilaf al-fuqaha, for qawaid fiqhiyya, etc., etc. And of course, the question of ethics. And here, the whole endeavor becomes an interdisciplinary approach, because we could link ethics first to philosophy and theology, to kalam and falsafa. Within the Islamic studies, ulum al-Islamiyya, and we could relate it also to the faculty of philosophy, practical philosophy, where legal philosophy and ethics are discussed as well, and to law schools, where we have also discussions on substantive law, on ethics, law and ethics, and legal philosophy. So if we have an interdisciplinary understanding of Islamic legal philosophy, I would say that there is a huge potential of both doing historical research and contemporary research, which is often more interesting and often more, not interesting, but decisive for the contemporary discussions among Muslims and Muslim scholars and authors. That was a little bit fast, the last slide. If you want to, we can discuss it further. And I want to thank you for your attention, and looking forward for our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Serdar KURNAZ. That was very, very interesting and very fresh. And he's a very young, intelligent professor that actually introduced a new taxonomy, as you see, from his study in 2000. What was that? 2000.
It is very recent, 2025.
2025. Wow, okay. All right, so that's very new. And maybe later you can introduce some of the articles or anything
Of course.
that you've written. Yeah, so that we can look into it. And it's what Professor KURNAZ has shown us is that Islamic law actually is not a frozen set of rules. It is a living, breathing intellectual tradition rooted in both revelation and reason. And if we only follow without asking, we risk missing its depth. But if we engage critically, as he has urged, we transform our understanding from memorizing texts to knowing their purpose, to applying them wisely in a changing world. And that truly is fiqh, the deep understanding that brings God's guidance to life. Okay, now we open the floor to questions, if any, from online or here in the floor in the room, conference room. We welcome the questions, please. Sure.
Sir, Ibn Hazm of Spain or Cordoba, he was the contemporary of the Dabusi,
Dabusi.
and Ibn Hazm had kind of like different ideas. He challenged most of the ideas that the scholars used to have in, we can say, in Sham area or even in the Central Asia. So my question is, shouldn't modern Islamic law should apply the framework of Ibn Hazm because they are more open to interpretation with the new issues that we are facing in the world today? Thank you.
I would say that I won't suggest to implement more the understanding of one scholar. Rather, we have to, for example, it would be very interesting to have a chapter on 5th century Islamic legal philosophical approaches, and then compare Al-Dabusi's approach from one end of the Islamic world with the approach of Ibn Hazm, who died 26 years later than Al-Dabusi at the very other end of the Islamic world, to see to whom they respond, how they respond. How we know also in Ibn Hazm's case, he has also a very interesting epistemology, criticizing the epistemology of the standard epistemology that was developed in the 5th century. Also ongoing discussion where he more focused on qat'iyat than dhanniyat. The other scholars more focused on the dhanniyat, to make this contrast. However, I would say implementing those understandings directly to our understanding would also lead to shortcomings. Since Ibn Hazm answered, or Ibn Hazm is also a product of his own historical circumstances, he answers to questions that leads him. These are very different from questions that we pose. So, but what we can do is, if we compare these different approaches, then we can be inspired. And maybe we can also find some way to combine these without being very selective, rather having a broader understanding of how legal philosophy can be, and then combine it. I can understand the point that sometimes Ibn Hazm helps us today to reject established madhab understandings, but Ibn Hazm has also very harsh understandings of some legal rulings. So we have also a selective understanding there. When Ibn Hazm helps, we go back to him, and when others helps, we go back to them. But I see the benefit of Ibn Hazm, that he takes the outward meaning of an utterance very seriously, and I like that idea, because if you take it seriously, what the very word means, you can understand the utterances properly, and then you can apply it. So where it is problematic in Ibn Hazm is the application, but the analysis of the very text is in most cases very interesting how Ibn Hazm does it. And I can imagine that reviving a Hazmian understanding of how to interpret text could be beneficial. Regarding, for example, riba, he is right. He by criticizing the schools that they have chosen an illah that is very arbitrary, very arbitrary. I worked a little bit on riba, and I've seen that he knows every different type of the ilal, the legal causes that the legal schools try to find in the case of the prohibition of riba. And he says this is very arbitrary. They argue like this and that gives flexibility, because he says, okay, let's stick to only the 6 elements that we see in the hadith. And what the very important point in Ibn Hazm is that he implements logic. He uses logic for qiyas and tries to exchange qiyas with logic, and you have a very flexible. Then you get a very flexible methods, dynamic method, in order to find legal rulings and how to deal with utterances in Quran and Hadith, to open them and to implement them also to cases that are similar to. So there is a benefit of using Ibn Hazm, but I would not say that we find the solution in Ibn Hazm. That was a long answer. I could take it short, like this last sentence. Sorry.
There's one question actually online. We have one question online from Brother Muhammad Zulfiqar Farhan. I would like to seek the panel's insights about how can Al-Dabusi's intellectual framework in Usul Fiqh be applied to strengthen the integration of Maqasid Sharia in Malaysia's administrative system, particularly ensuring justice, public welfare, and transparency within contemporary governance.
Yes. I don't know the solution for that, but I think that Al-Dabusi's framework, very rational framework, would allow to implement Maqasid Sharia very easily. What we have to do then is, or what you can do is, I would suggest, is that you can you can open the fourfold division that I presented before as being the necessary rational grounds of law, and combine them with Maqasid Sharia. The problem here is then how you argue. Are you going to make references to Quran and Hadith, or you are going to purely argue in a rational sense? Al-Dabusi does it from a very strong rational perspective. That could be done also with Maqasid Sharia, I guess. But you can do it also a combination of both by saying, okay, I do like Ash-Shatibi, istiqra, induction, to say, okay, this is the very basic of the revelation, and that goes hand in hand with rational argumentation. So you can say that Sharia, all Sharia or the Madhahib are based on rational grounds, as Al-Dabusi says, and there is no tension between between reason and revelation. And you have to do also, you have to at least have a Maturidian understanding of revelation and reason, to say that human beings can grasp good and bad, but revelation has a corrective function. Then it is possible to argue, to say that Sharia is based on these objectives of the Sharia, and everything that contradicts it cannot be a valid legal ruling. That could be one way to frame or to use Abu Zayd al-Dabusi for Maqasid approaches.
Thanks. My question is about qat'i.
Yeah.
And I think there are 2 types of qat'i, qat'iyyat al-thubut and qat'iyyat al-dilala.
Yes.
So when it is about qat'iyyat al-thubut, where existence is confirmed, I mean,
Yes.
certain, and when it is about qat'iyyat al-dilala,
Yes.
on the basis of our changing contexts,
Yes.
and changing of our own understandings on the basis of our purposes and so on. So my question is, do you think there should be anything like qat'iyatul dalala? I mean, anything written?
Yes.
Because our the changes of our context, understanding, and so I mean, there should not be any qat'iyatul.
I think that qat'iyut dalala, as some scholars argue, is nearly impossible. If we look at least at Fakhruddin al-Razi's Al-Mahsul, Fakhruddin al-Razi at the very beginning of his work says that using language leads automatically to dhann, to presumption, because you have to presume that someone uses not majaz, but he uses haqiqah. You have to presume that someone does not mean if you use a general utterance, if you say, I have seen all men, that you did not see all men or only a portion of them. So there are many assumptions that you have to pretend that I understand what you've said. So therefore, it is, philosophically speaking, impossible to say, okay, I know definitely what it means. You can only say presumptively. But then Razi knows that the whole legal tradition does not work that way. So he says, okay, if there is corroborative information, if I can argue inductively, and if there are shuhud, he says, there are witnesses of that I'm right, then I can claim that something is being qat'i dalala. So I would say as we are very far away from the historical circumstances in which the Quran was revealed, I would say that is for us impossible to claim qat'i dalala rather than to argue with regard to dhanni dalala. The only thing would be then how to deal with numbers in Quran. I mean, 1/3 is always 1/3 if you look in inheritance law. But there, the approach could be a different one. Like maybe we have seen already today Fazlur Rahman's collection here. Maybe the solution could be the historical critical understanding or a historical understanding of the Quranic utterances, and I'm a fan of that. I mean, not uncritically, critically fan of that.
Was it?
Yes, Fatih.
All right.
We look back at the Al-DABUSI'S typology of prohibition from qabbih li-ghayrihi and li-dhatihi. I feel like it seems to do more than just classify actions. It feels like, I would say, juristic lens into the soul of law itself, I would say.
Yes.
So, and it looks to what makes an evil in the sight of God. Is it the act itself, or the context itself, or the intention behind it? So, my question is, does his TAQWIN Al-ADILLA suggest that the legal validity is somehow a separate track from moral soundness? If so, is he offering us a vision of sacred law that probably tolerates imperfection, so as long that the form is preserved?
For the last part of your question, yes. And for the first part of your question, I think, especially in his qabih li'aynihi, there is a correlation between morality and legality. But in the question of qabih li'ghayrihi, there is a distinction between law and ethics, I would say. So he does not make any claims or any statements about the morality of that action. For him, it's clear it's a sin that you do trade in Friday prayer. But he looks at it from a very legalistic perspective and says, okay, there is that contract. There is the other guy that made the contract as well. So you have to buy that thing that you have traded. So the contract is valid, because there is nothing that is intrinsically immoral. That the action is only immoral because you have done something that is prohibited by law. So I think there is a distinction between law and ethics, and that was also the reason why I do not understand why to say that that modern scholars especially say that there is a correlation between law and ethics in Islamic law, or there is no correlation between ethics and Islamic law. There are points that there is a huge distinction, and there are points that there is no distinction, and you see it in the very same question that the haram li ghayrihi or qabih li ghayrihi is treated from a very legalistic perspective, not asking about the morality of the action. On the other hand, you see it in qabih li aynihi that must go hand in hand with moral questions, because it's rationally also forbidden to do something, and that is also morally forbidden.
So, does it align with some St. Aquinas, like natural law theory?
At Debussy, I would say one could, but I don't see so far an elaborate understanding of natural law like in Thomas Aquinas that you can compare with at Debussy. I can imagine that you can use Thomas Aquinas in order to enlarge at Debussy's frame, because he is so focused on the rationally argued grounds of Sharia, that would make sense to interpret it in terms of natural law. Okay. Thank you.
About worship, the concept of worshiping, yes, I mean, majority of Muslims nowadays, they are thinking worship is like aesthetic functions of our daily life.
Mm.
So, does he say anything about the holism, I mean, holistic approach to the
Mhm.
worship or
Mhm.
multidimensional?
Not in his TAQWIN al-ADILLA, but I think he says in his Sufi work Al-Amad al-Aqsa, but I haven't read it so far. So basically, I don't know in TAQWIN al-ADILLA not, but it can be that he says something to that in Al-Amad al-Aqsa. There will be a new edition of his Al-Amad al-Aqsa, edited by a Turkish professor, Murtaza Bedir, who already has an article on Ahmad al-Aqsa in a Spanish edited volume. The article is in English and also translated to Spanish, Murtaza Bedir. But I cannot remember that Murtaza Bedir wrote something on worship.
Okay, any more questions from Zoom? Let me take a look if we have it. Okay, no. All right, I'll maybe ask one. Probably not very sensitive and probably necessarily sensitive. I don't know. You mentioned the importance of actually the moving from maslaha to maqasid as a part of legal theory discussions. So how would this shift affect the way we approach contemporary legal challenges, especially in areas where the public good is contested or politically invested?
I'm not sure. I think the transition from maslaha to maqasid make us to discuss things in more abstract, on a more abstract level. So my problem with maqasid sharia often is it is on the one hand an advantage, on the other hand a disadvantage. On the one hand, it is an advantage because it is not very well defined. It is somewhat flexible. On the other hand, this flexibility can also be used in a very negative way. So everyone can say what he or she thinks about this very abstract understanding. I want to give you one example. The protection of family in Jamaluddin Atiyah's work appear with regard to rahma, mercy, and also you see the same in Adi Studeria, who is a Bosnian Islamicist. I think he's in Australia. He says also that family should be built up with regard to compassion. But what Duderia says in the protection of family is equality, etc., gender equality. But in Jamaluddin Atiyah, he says it should be the family law should be built up on traditional Islamic family law, where, as you know, that men have more rights with regard to women. So using maqasid al-sharia in public policy and also in contemporary discussions could be, on the one hand, very productive because you can use many ideas, but on the other hand, you can misuse it and reproduce traditional knowledge in a new garment, pretending to have something very contemporary by saying that this is protection of family and comes from maqasid al-sharia, etc., etc. So it has the advantages and disadvantages, and I think, and I don't know how it works, but if we would engage with legal philosophical discussions out of Islamic studies, using philosophical works, using works written by professors for law, for legal philosophy, there we would find more arguments in order to also create criteria to which we can stick to find solutions that are useful for contemporary Muslims. So that's what I'm hoping for, but I do not have any a specific example for that for now. But I'm sure that there will be criteria because these questions are not only related to the Islamic tradition. The law, the professors for law and ethics, they all struggle with contemporary questions regarding ethics, bioethics, medicine ethics, etc., etc. So I hope that is more or less an answer to your question.
If we don't have any questions, we extend our gratitude to Professor KURNAZ
Thank you.
for his deeply insightful and forward-thinking presentation. And we hope we appreciate our audience here and also online. And may today's lecture continue to inspire critical reflection and fruitful dialogue on how our rich legal tradition can actually dynamically respond to modern ethical challenges. And before we end, I think we give it. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
And so, okay, thank you so much to our distinguished speaker and to our moderator for guiding to this discussion. So we now come to the end of our 15th Distinguished Scholar Lecture. So on behalf of Istac-Iium, I would like to extend our deepest appreciation to our speaker, Professor Dr. SERDAR KURNAZ, for his enriching and valuable insight, thought-provoking presentation, and to our moderator, Assistant Professor Dr. Nurani Norman, for guiding this discourse, and to all of you, our respected guests, students, and the public here in Zoom, for your presence and engagement this afternoon. Since we began with the Little German, allow me to end with one as well. Okay, so as good as one said, es ist nicht genug zu wissen, man muss auch anwenden. Es ist nicht genug zu wollen, man muss auch tun. That is, knowing is not enough. We must apply. Willing is not enough. We must do. And may today's lecture be a call, not just to know, but to act. So, vielen Dank und auf Wiedersehen. Thank you and see you again. So at this point, we'd like to invite Assistant Professor Dr. Nurani Norman to present a token of appreciation to our distinguished speaker. Thank you. So thank you once again for being with us this afternoon. We look forward to your presence in our future Istac events. So with that, I bid Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Walaikum assalam
Yeah, for that, we also like to invite all present to join us for a group photo session together with our speaker and moderator. And thank you so much.